Yeah, ready to go.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 76 of Get Out a Rap. Today, I'm joined by Martin Pemberton. Martin is the first professional footballer that's been on the show, and we've already had a chat before. You can see we're both grinning. We spoke last week. You are seeing the birth of a friendship here on the podcast, but
It's a bromance. It's not a friendship, Mark. This is a bromance. That's just
yes.
This has happened, right? We are.
It is a proper bromance. But so you're a professional footballer for over a decade. Now public speaker, well-being trainer, mindset and transformation coach, and you created Just 1 to 11, which I can't wait to talk about. I think it's brilliant. But Martin, thanks very much for coming on.
It's my absolute pleasure, my friend. I'm excited for this today. I love speaking with you. So we'll just see. Let's see what happens, right?
Exactly. We had a little chat, didn't we, last week? And we both had to stop because otherwise we'd have just done the podcast without it being recorded. So yeah. Obviously, I'm a massive football's my always has been my release, my passion. I have to tell you a funny story actually. So I'm getting married at the end of August, and so we had a family stag do on Sunday. So it was dad, uncles, Bev's uncles and dad and stepdad and stuff who didn't come to the sort of lads one. And my dad, like, I got to semi-pro when I was 18. That's about it. And then I've still carried on playing football. I love it. Anyway, I lived in Germany because my dad was in the Air Force. So you never really had a chance. There were no scouts. There was nothing like that. But when we got posted back, I asked my football coach at the time from the Air Force team to write me a letter so that I could take it to teams, professional teams when we got posted back to the UK. And my dad bought me the letter. It's the funniest thing ever. It's written on a typewriter. The best thing this guy could say about me was I helped with fundraising. I was a nice lad. I was well known in the team, and with the right guidance, I should be given a trial. What I liked is he started with I was good at fundraising. So no wonder I didn't get a chance. I'm going to put it down to that rather than lack of ability. But how did it all start for you?
So I think for me, as apparently, I always had a football at my feet. I don't really, obviously, till you're conscious, you don't really remember that. And then I think my mum took me to go play football somewhere. And my dad used to work nights then, so he could never make it. And it was the typical thing. My mum was like, he's really good, you know. And my dad's like, what does she know? She just, of course, she's going to say that. She's his mum. And then he came and he watched, and he was actually like, oh, actually, yeah, he's something there. But I think for me, Martin, it was just it's like you said about that feeling of playing football, what it brings to you, and that you just forget all your worries. You get to just have the most fun. It's like I think we spoke last week. I said kind of that was my first love, like that.
Yeah.
And it literally like was my first love. And so from that point, nothing ever really mattered outside of that. I fell in love with football. I thought this is what I want to do when I leave school. And kind of naively, you think, well, doesn't everybody just go and do that? So that was the journey. But it's a 10-year journey from conception to realization, and along the way I only looked back recently and thought, wow, I had quite a few challenges, like I fractured my back when I was 11, but we didn't know about it. So I played for 3 years with like a stress fracture. Then I got down to the last few of the Lillishall trials back in the day, the National Football School. So I got down to like literally being able to go to that, and then you have to have a medical. So I had a scan, found out I had a stress fracture, and then they said, right, you can't play for a year. So I could do nothing, no PE.
My God.
No, and so you can imagine how agonizing that was. And at around 6 months, I did it a bit of a wall. I do remember shedding a few tears at that point. But what also that year gave me the opportunity to do was go out and hang out on the streets with all my mates from school and do all the things that teenagers kind of do, to experience it for a year, so that when I came back, I wasn't interested in it. I knew I wasn't missing anything, if that makes sense. And then, you get in schoolboy forms with Oldham, and then you get on the old YTS scheme, 37 quid a week to get
yes.
to get treated like absolute
dirt,
but unbelievable. But you're just so happy to be there.
Yeah.
But you go from doing your GCSEs and living with your mum to the next day you're running up a hill and you've got all these guys effing and blinding and shouting at you, calling you all the names under the sun, and it's a real wake-up call. But do you know what? Those 2 years of being an apprentice were probably two of the most enjoyable of my life, and I think a lot of the guys who experienced it said the same. And it's similar with the forces and stuff. You get a real camaraderie, you go through a lot of adversity, and I think it's different now. We have to clean boots and scrub dressing rooms and pick up sweaty slips off the floor. And I remember having to bring a pot of tea into the first team room in Oldham, and you'd be so scared because if it wasn't the right temperature or it wasn't right, it wasn't a polite, can you take that back and redo it? The cup was usually coming back at your head with tea, right? But there was also this kind of respect for the professionals, and not that you wanted to be or treat people like that. I never did anyway, but it was something to try to ascend to get to that level of becoming a pro footballer. And so, at 18, I was lucky enough to get that opportunity at Oldham.
Do you think, because now, I mean, if you love football, you just devour any content about football. So now lads going into that, and my son was in Reading's academy for 8 years, and that the YTS sort of experiences you've just talked about then just doesn't exist anymore, does it? That kind of, and you were going into, let's be honest, Oldham at the time was known as a team. It was all about, they were tough. They played good football, but they were tough. They were team spirited, a little bit like the Wimbledon crazy gang of the North, right? So it must have been even tougher for you. What were some of the characters like there?
And it was really cold as well in Oldham, the Pennines there, But well, I mean, founder members of the Premier League, again, like you said, they were just in that golden age for Oldham Athletic as a club with some of the players and the teams. But some of the characters, there were John Hallworth, they used to call him Captain Darling, I think, from Blackadder. That was his name. But then I had the likes of Craig Fleming, who he was my professional I looked after, and he was always very particular about the 3 stripes of his Adidas World Cups being really clean, right? So I used to get the Vaseline in the cloth and you'd be scrubbing away. Ian Marshall, who I think we mentioned, Marshy was a centre-half or striker. He was a real character, Scouser. And I remember one day, me and some of my mates, we'd got the changing rooms done, we'd scrubbed the floors, we'd mopped it, dried it, and Marshy came into the dressing room and was like, "Oh, how are you doing, lads? What are you doing this afternoon? Have you got anything planned?" I was like, "Yeah, Marshy, we're going to go into Manchester or whatever." And as we were saying that, he had his foot on top of the mop bucket full of dirty water at the top of the stairs. So he had that look in his eye, and I was like, "Marshy, please, mate, don't do it." And he just pushed it off the top step, obviously the water, and he just said, "Don't look like you're going into Manchester, lad," and just walked out. But you couldn't do anything. But it didn't even occur to me to say anything to him because, again, there was that level of respect that I think is maybe not there as much now. And although I think we said there was one end of the pendulum where it was maybe over the top in some respects and really harsh, we're at the other end of the pendulum where there's no responsibility taken or kind of no learning. So hopefully we'll find our way back into the middle, not just in football. I think that's in society as well, where yes, everyone's got rights and freedoms, and that's absolutely right. But with your rights and freedoms comes a responsibility as well that I think's maybe lacking at times for people at the minute. We want the freedom to choose and be how we want, but if anyone disagrees with us, then we have a problem with that. And so it don't make sense to me. If we have those freedoms, people have the freedoms to disagree with us and not have to fall out.
I totally agree. And hopefully over time, over this podcast, I've spoke to people who we might have different views about things, but we've been able to talk about it and without it just being adversarial, A versus B. It should be about, let's talk about where our differences come from and what we think about it. I was just going to ask you, so again, last week we talked about just trying to get to know each other. We found out we were the same kind of kids, right? So now is the time of summer holidays. Summer holidays for me, no matter where I lived, would be get the football, and the football was never far away. Get the football and just go out and then play games where the score was like 77, 76 with your mates. And just your mum comes out and shouts at you to get back in. You just lost track of time. All you cared about, football was the thing that brought you joy. You know, when you become a pro and you run out into a stadium and there's fans, when you're actually playing, did you still have that sort of quiet effect in your head, or was it different?
It depends. I think at certain points in games where maybe the action stops, then you're more aware of the crowd, etc. But when you're in the midst of it and you're focused or you're doing whatever you're doing, you're still aware of the crowd, and you obviously can hear things and you get the energy from them, certainly when you're at home. But there is a little bit of a, like you said, a silence where there's just this focus. Everybody's concentrating on doing the job essentially. But I think as well, what changed for me from the apprenticeship to becoming a pro, I think there's then this realization it's now your job, and so there's a responsibility, and you're playing for points, and you're playing to get in the team, and you're competing to get in the team, and then you're competing to stay in the team, and then there's 11 other people trying to stop you winning football matches, and you've got people, thousands of people who've paid for the privilege to come in, and then they feel because they've paid, they can now say what they want to you, right? And then you finish playing the game, and someone who's maybe never kicked the ball at the level you have then gives you a mark out of 10 that they're going to put in a national newspaper. And depending on what kind of game they think you've had, if it's a 5, everybody sees it. And then you get people who give you a call after the weekend to see how the game went, knowing full well that you got a 5 in the paper, but they don't call you when you got an 8 or a 9, right? So there's this complete, the emotional roller coaster, I believe, in terms of being a professional sports person. You don't realize it when you're in it, but it's only when you come out of it, I think, that the after effects are felt. And that was certainly the case for me.
I read this thing about, I love what you said then about just people phoning you and contacting you. It's not very often you see sports people talk about that, but there was a guy who fights in the UFC who lost. And he said, like, his cousin, who's never had an amateur or professional fight in his life, phoned him and said, you should have done this, you should have done that, you should have done this. And he said, do you know what? I've just lost. This is not what I need. So all of that noise that goes around it, how did you deal with that?
I think you just get used to it. I think part of growing up, the process of playing as a kid, like we said, every day, and then you move into the youth setup, and then the reserves, and then you get in the first team, and there's more people. I suppose it's just like most things, we adapt to our environment, don't we? Often through repetition. So I think you do, but then you do become kind of indoctrinated into that way of living and that way of being. That football, I mean, it's not the real world, is it? Let's be honest. Like,
it's better than the real world.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, it's amazing. So I think that, just like most things for most people, if you practice anything enough, you can get good at it. And I say this to people in terms of both things you might consider negative or positive. Even negative behaviors, thought patterns, processes are practiced, right? So that it comes second nature and it becomes a habit. So if somebody now is maybe acting in a way that I wouldn't, or I might think in my head and call them a certain name or them a certain name, I just think to myself now, wow, they must have practiced a lot to become as good at being like that, right? And it just makes me giggle. Then I don't get mad with them because essentially they've become world class at being
an idiot,
behaving in that way.
You've practiced at this.
Well, they put a lot of time into it, so I'll at least respect them for the time invested.
Good on you. I appreciate your commitment. So you, I've had a look as well, and you actually played for a team. Like I say, because my dad was in the RAF, we moved around all over the place. And one of the places we went to was Finningley, and the nearest town was Doncaster. So we used to go and watch Doncaster Rovers, Donny Rovers. Bellevue.
Bellevue. So that was an experience. So I was at Oldham, and then I thought I was going on loan, but I had an agent at that time, but he was nowhere to be seen. I won't name him. But so I kind of me and my dad, you don't really know what you're doing when you go in and talk about contracts and all these things. So
Mm.
I thought I was going to be going on loan, come back to Oldham at the end of the season, but actually I'd signed for Doncaster, right? And I should have signed on loan, but you kind of want to get playing and doing whatever.
Yeah.
But it's only when you arrived at the club that you realised like how much disarray the club was in at that time. The chairman was
Really?
quite a character, shall we say. He wanted total control over the football club. Kerry Dixon was the manager actually when I signed.
Wow,
Do you
really?
remember Kerry Dixon?
Yeah.
What
Chelsea
a
striker.
oh, absolute gent. And you know, you've got people of the class of Kerry Dixon working there, but you could see the pressure and the restrictions that he had. And so he left at the end of that season, and I left about a year after joining. So fortunately, I was able to kind of get out of that environment because it wasn't conducive for, well, I suppose, expressing yourself and enjoying your job. You know, when there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, it kind of then does impact on the playing side.
What would you say was the highlight of your career?
Highlight of my career, professionally, was I think we won a promotion with Mansfield back in 2002, and we got a promotion, from League Two to League One, and just because not many people get promotions in football, they play all their lives and they don't win things or they don't, succeed. So to play in a team in League Two, and I've still got a load of good mates from that team as well. We all still speak and things, and just the group of players that we had, we were all really good mates. But the style of football we played was which made it so much enjoyable. We didn't just kick and rush it; we passed it around, and it was really entertaining football. So I would say that would be the highlight, certainly for me, was those 2 years at Mansfield, and certainly that promotion year.
Well, I love it, and we could talk about it all day. But I'm really keen to now go on to like a part of your life that you are where you are now, and you're successful, and you've got this great scheme, just 1 to 11, that I want to talk about, and it's really it's great for men, mental health, well-being, all aspects of life. But go from the football. Am I right in thinking that it was injury that led to you having to give up something that had been your life, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had a few injuries over my career. I mentioned the back at being young. I had 2 operations on my discs at different times in my career, years apart. Dislocated shoulder, knee injury. So eventually, it was a knee injury that I ended up finishing with. But yeah, you don't realise the impact, even though it's spoken about. Footballers don't want to talk about it. Every game could be a last game, right? You don't want to go out thinking that that's it. So one thing you'll deny forever, but you don't realise what the impact is when you come out of it. So, like we talked about, if it's your first love, and you've had this relationship where this love-hate throughout your whole life, that when you lose it, it's going to be like a grieving period.
Yeah.
I saw someone who posted on LinkedIn not so long ago about, grief's not just about losing someone who dies. He gave lots of different examples. And I suppose that loss of identity, the thing that you'd always known, you lose your foundations, knowing where you were going to be 11 months of the year already planned out for you. So there was certainty. You lose all your teammates who understand you and have been through the same thing. So they get you. You come out and you don't know what people kind of are into or get them, and they don't get you. And there's a different way of thinking. And so with all those things, and partly some of those things, you end up then at a place of grieving, which actually for me probably took 6 years for that to manifest itself into mental health kind of challenges.
It's a really good point. I think that kind of, you even just thinking about the structure of your week. So you knew what you were doing, when you were doing it, and then to go from that to avoid. And I'm assuming once you knew that you couldn't play at that level anymore, is it just a complete contrast? That's you go from that to nothing.
Well, yeah. Once you finish, depending on how physically fit you are, but yeah. So then it's like, well, what am I going to do now? But also, what am I good at? What skills have I got to offer anyone else now? Because you don't understand that you've got all these transferable skills and this experience that you've been through and all the things you've kind of achieved. Because even for myself, you can sometimes think, well, I never played in the Premier League, so you can discount your achievement, if that makes sense. But actually, to become a professional footballer and do it for 10 years is a hell of an achievement. But I think there's a tendency to downplay it if you've not been in Premier League. So, but actually, to think that however many percent it is really low, isn't it? That you get to do that. I think that then coming out of that, you don't realise that you've got a lot to give. So therefore, low self-esteem and no value. It's then like, right, well, what do I do now? So, I mean, luckily for me, I got a job as a learning mentor for disadvantaged children with like social and emotional issues. Okay, but I've always wanted to help people, so that was a nice natural progression. But what I say is, of course, these kids have got their own things going on, and school's not really the highlight of their life. Even though school wanted to be interested in school, it's like it's unbelievable. I essentially swapped one environment for getting kicked and maybe racially abused for another one. But I just got paid a lot less. Do you know what I mean? So familiar territory, but just not the same paycheck to maybe soften it a little bit for you, and longer hours as well, I suppose. You know.
But that's a strange. You know, I guess not many people would think you would go from professional footballer, and it's true what you say. I found this amazing when, like you, people can be quite critical of footballers without necessarily understanding. To get to be a professional footballer at any level, you're in the top single-digit percent, and you've gone through a horrendous process. It's like I said, my son Taylor, every 12 weeks, it was going to be stay in the academy or go. And that pressure from 8 years old onwards is mental to deal with. So fair play to you and anyone that gets to that level. And I guess it doesn't soften the blow when you've got people eating pies and stuff, shouting at you. They get tired walking up to their seats.
But with that also, though, but you learn to deal with it, because you're being judged and you're judging yourself for a very, very long time and being critiqued. So I think most footballers are probably their harshest critic. I remember a couple of times, certainly when I was at Mansfield, or, you know, many conversations with my dad when I was younger of, how did you think you'd done today? And we'd go into a big inquest. But there were at one point when I think I got to a certain age where he asked me the question and I kind of just looked at him, and then we didn't have to speak about it again, because I've not had a particularly good game, and I knew I hadn't. So I mean, the flip side of that is as well, some people say, "Oh, you did really well today," but you know you haven't done well. So that doesn't work, you know. So there was that kind of changeover between me and my dad, where he stopped saying things to me because he knew there was no point, you know, and nothing he could say could make me feel any better. And there was certainly no point in terms of being critical, because again, like you said, unless you've been there, seen it and done it, it's a difficult place to come from, right?
Sorry, I got sidetracked again, but it's just because we're just going off each other. But so that change from footballer to working with disadvantaged children. I mean, and how long did you do that? What was that like?
Well, I mean, I did that for 6 years, and also so when I retired, I also ended up getting married, moving house, and then had a daughter inside about a year as well, which I wouldn't recommend that anybody does those things in that amount of time. Don't retire from the career that you've had and loved forever. Get married, move house, and start a new job, and have a daughter. Yeah.
Did you look at that list of the most stressful things that happen in someone's life and go, I'm going to do all 5 of the top 10?
Just get them out of the way straight away, Martin. Just while we're messing around, we might as well get this done. So yeah, I highly recommend people don't attempt all those things in a calendar year, because it won't work out too well for you. But yeah, but again, I've always had this, I think, thought or belief that I've wanted to help people, you know, whether that's from upbringing or examples with my parents and family, but I've always felt that way. So getting to work with some of these children was really, really rewarding in a different way. Also, I think with your football background, and in primary at that stage, there weren't many males. So in terms of male influences, for predominantly lads. So to give these young boys, I suppose, maybe someone that they could look at. And football's always a great in, isn't it?
Yeah.
With most lads, like, oh, you played football, do you know? And so it enabled me to kind of build these relationships with these kids, so that when we did transition back into school, I'd always be the one who'd go and support them. But I think, again, with that, it brings its own stresses and pressures. And 6 years later, I ended up with man flu first, right? So it was July 2013. Everyone else is all like, it's a bit of a heat wave. Everyone's in all the t-shirt and all the summer clobber, and I'm fully wrapped up in a jumper and a fleece, and I'm freezing, and I've got the man flu. So I end up going home and kind of toughing it out. You know, it is, mate. It's a tough one, right? It's like man flu.
No one understands it.
They'll never get it. They'll never understand. So you battle your way through man flu. And then I was due to come back to work, but there had been a bit of a power struggle at work as well. And I was kind of the person in the middle who both people confided in, and I wasn't on anybody's side. But again, more kind of pressure that you didn't understand you were under. And I think that was kind of the thing where I just thought, oh God, I'm going to go back into that. And then the kids with all their issues. And so it all came crumbling down. I was watching TV with my little daughter, I think she was 4 at the time. And I just started crying for absolutely. I want to say we was watching Bambi or Watership Down or something, mate. But we weren't.
Watership Down gets me every time, to be honest.
Got me. And so just this wave of emotion came over me, and then a tear started rolling down my face. But at that moment, I was like, oh God, this is not like man flu that I've had before. But I also said, I don't want my daughter to see me crying, right? Because you've got all those beliefs about what it is to be a man and to be strong and be provider, protector. God, I can't, and all this thing about nonsense about boys don't cry and all that that you get kind of preconditioned with. So I kind of left the room without a knowing, and then I went into my wife at the time, and I just broke down. I said, I cannot go to work tomorrow. Just when you're so scared to kind of do something, and I felt like the only way I can explain it, it's like I felt I had a massive slab of concrete on my chest, and if you're on bench pressing, you just can't lift it off, right? It was like that. And so my ex-wife said, yeah, just why don't you go see the doctor? And I was like, yeah, okay. But then I had this feelings of anxiety around, what if the doctor says there's nothing wrong with you, like pull yourself together and get to work, because that's what you would have experienced in the football world. So my mind was like, someone's gonna say, what's wrong with you, like get back to work. So then I had this whole feelings of anxiety before going to the doctors tomorrow about what he was going to say or she was going to say. And fortunately, obviously, he said, no, you need to stay off work. So he gave me a sick note, which actually coincided just before the summer holidays. So I got extra time as well. And he said, I think you should get on antidepressants, because they don't have the time, do they, to diagnose and go into the bits. This is one of the things, right, with the system. There's no time. So they're like, right, get yourself some tablets. And also, I said, recommend you go for some counselling. Which I found a number, and this is one of the things I say when I do my talks, is that fortunately enough for me, somebody must have either cancelled or just finished their block of sessions, because a spot came available in the Leeds area. Now, Leeds has got 800,000 people in, and one spot became available for me at that precise time. Now, if that hadn't have happened, I don't know what would have been the outcome. So I was really something was on my side to make the stars line up. But from that period, then I've got feelings of depression. This real worthlessness and not being able to get out of bed, and just having this really bleak outlook on life. But coupled with feelings of anxiety, of worried about what everyone was going to think. I was in the supermarket one day, and I thought that the lady on the checkout could tell. Like I said, in my head, I was like, she knows I'm mental. She knows that I'm off my head. All these things were going through my head. And then then it appeared that I thought everybody was looking at me in the supermarket. So I just had to leave the trolley, and I ran home, and I just got under the covers, and I stayed there for probably a day or two. But while I was under the covers, I could hear my
Martin, you've just broken up there with your internet.
in this kind of loop of just behavior and thought processes of just being constantly wanting to do something different, but then not being able to.
Mike, can you just take us back? I just lost your
Yeah.
internet. I lost your internet connection then.
Yeah.
So you just, and thanks for sharing this. I think it's so important for guys to talk about this thing. When you were talking about some of those early feelings, the phrase that kept coming in my head was just man up, and that's in the past that has been said to me, and I know how destructive that could be. So thanks so much for sharing. But you cut out, you just got to the point where you run back from the supermarket and got under the covers. Can you just start again from there?
Yeah, got under the covers, and then you stay there, but then I can hear the kids, because I've got 2 daughters by now, and my ex-wife's downstairs looking after them. So there's this, I need to go help, but then you're scared to come out from under the covers, and then there's the guilt of not being able to, or having the will to go and do that. So then this cycle just continues of self-loathing, of not being able to do what you should be able to do. That's what you say in your head as well. And so, and one of the things that you mentioned about the man up, I actually confided in somebody once about how I was feeling, and their response was, well, what have you got to be depressed about, right? So absolutely wounded, because I'd plucked up the courage to admit, but now I take that as my responsibility, because I chose that person to tell it to. And so now I'd say to people, make sure that you 100% trust this person you're going to speak to, and that there'll be no judgment, because that person could only look at my life based on what they thought. Ex-professional footballer, married, 2 kids, having a great time. What's he got to be sad about? So that's one thing I do say to people as well. Understand what your support system is, and look at your environment and the people you've got around you for who you might go and have that conversation. Because if someone's going to judge you, it knocks you back even more, because you've actually been brave enough to say it, right? So yeah, depression, and then the feelings of anxiety. And I used to go to counselling sessions, mate. Right, get off the train and have my earphones in, because that's the universal sign for don't speak to me. Right? So everyone does it now. And so I'd be going to counselling, and like when you see groups of people, I just thought, they're going to mug me, they're going to beat me up, like steal my phone. Just convince myself that these people were going to attack me. So I'd get ready, because it's fight or flight. Then I can either run off, but then I've got to go to this counselling session. I need to go. So it's like, right, it's going to have to be fight. And then, so I picked the biggest one in the group, because I thought, I'll smash it.
Get them first.
If I get in first, they'll all run off and leave me alone. So you gear yourself up, and of course, to walk right by, you don't even know you're there. And so then you go through the feelings of shame and guilt, of how ridiculous, how stupid, as of course they're not going to notice you, moron. You like that kind of stuff. And so you rationalize it, but then 2 minutes later, you see another group of people, and you go through the same process. And so it's just this endless loop of fight or flight, which of course is
exhausting.
Tiring. It is. And then I nearly got knocked over once, actually. And this is when it kind of properly, I had the realization of how deep things were for me, was that, someone came around the corner, beat the horn, I jumped back, they shouted a few obscenities at me, and I probably shouted some back. But then my mind was like, that was really close. Could have got knocked over then. And then I was like, might have broke my leg, broke my pelvis, concussion, might have ended up in a coma. This is how my brain was going. And then I said, might have died. And then I said, that'll be all right, because all this shit will be over. That's the commentary. And I was like, wow. Because that's when it first hit me of where I actually was. Because as well, what I say to people is about communication is, I was frustrated with everybody around me, because they were all giving me this wonderful advice based on what they'd experienced and what they thought. Keep yourself busy and go and do that. And, I was like, that's the complete opposite of what I need. So I always say to people as well, now, if someone comes to you, don't give them advice straight off the bat. Just listen to understand. Don't listen to respond, listen to understand. Because then I was getting really mad with people. Like, I was to the point where I was paranoid, mate. I thought my ex-missus was trying to bump me off because she wanted the insurance money, right? That's where I was in my head.
Like,
absolutely. And now when I'm like, oh dear me, But that's where I was. But then the other fundamental I realised was that I'd not told everybody how bad things were at that time. So they were only going off what I was presenting to them. So this is why I say to people, be really open and honest about where you're at when you find the right people, because then you can get the right level of support. They'll know how to speak or how to pitch up and do what they do for you. And then you won't get that miscommunication that I had. So
I think that what you're doing though in all your work now, and even just sharing today, is this increase in awareness and breaking down some of the misconceptions, but it's like you mentioned earlier, like habits. I think as a society we have habits, and for men, whilst we are in a privileged part of society, right, as men,
yep.
what we don't get is this, like you say, is kind of you're conditioned certainly not to show your children any perceived weakness. But what I like about what you said then is, because I recognize myself in, especially your loved ones, they want to fix, right? So someone comes to you and says they are struggling or have a problem. Your inclination is to fix quickly because you don't like it. You don't like thinking of a loved one in distress. So you go into fix, and fix means giving advice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, do this. And I absolutely have spent, I'm 47. It's taken me this long to get to a point with my children and others around me to, even now I have to stop myself. I just go, right, listen.
Yeah.
Just listen first. Don't be going straight into fix mode.
Yeah.
And that, but also I think the guy that the person that you first shared with said, what have you got to be down about, says something. For me, all I heard was then they just weren't competent enough to be able to deal with that. That says everything about them, and you doing the right thing. It's not about you, it's actually about them, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's one of the realizations that you realize eventually, is that one of the things I always say to people is nothing you ever do is because of someone else, and nothing anyone else does is ever because of you.
Yeah.
And people go, hey, what? And I'm saying, like, think about it. We all make decisions based on what we want to do or in response to, but we do it ultimately because we want to do it. Even if that's getting mad or cross with someone and shouting, we do it for our benefit, not for theirs. We'll pretend that we do it for their benefit, but it's not. And vice versa, that not taking things personally, that people do things because of you. And so once you can understand that concept, you can start to gain more control over your life. And so it's kind of, I say to people, if you can learn to be, to give people the freedom to be however they want to be, but you also understand that you've got that freedom, then you're going to live a different way and you're going to have a different experience of life. But however, get this, when you start doing what you want to do, you're going to get some feedback from those people who you've allowed to be that way, because they don't know that you're doing that, right?
And they don't know that they don't know the contract has changed.
Exactly. And then if they're used to certain behaviors or ways of being, there's going to be resistance when you start changing. So if you're a people pleaser, for example, and you've always have been, and you come to this realization, and then you start doing things for yourself, you're going to get called selfish of the very people who you've always put first, right? They'll forget your past history.
Yeah.
They'll just go off what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Well, they've changed. What's wrong with them? And so it's this, like you said, this self-awareness. So what I say about self-awareness is awareness of what you do and how you are, but awareness of self is a different thing. That's you getting in connection and understanding who you are at your core, which is based on your own value system. So that's something else that's part of the 1 to 11, right? Once I understood this, that values, and I can't remember how many there is. There's so many values that you could put in a list. It's ridiculous. But what you'll find is when you can narrow them down and go, these are the ones that are most applicable that I believe in, they'll come under one banner. And most of the time, the value that we all cherish is freedom. And underneath freedom comes love, comes courage, comes all different things that people, but that's when we're out of alignment with that. That's why we have a load of problems, because we're not living to in the agreement with who we really are. And so that's when people are doing things that they don't really want to be doing or know they shouldn't. saying and hanging around with people who they think they don't really want to be, you know, and no one can tell you this stuff, by the way. If you just pay attention, you will know when you're around people, there's a feeling and you go,
Yeah.
nah, these are not for me. But it's that being able to stay grounded and aligned in your values that then stands you in good stead, because then you can withstand anything, I believe, when you're standing where you want to be. But this is the booby trap of getting your values straight. Once you get your values, this is then, we all have the propensity to judge other people by our values. So I'll be saying, well, this is how I live. I can't believe Martin's doing that. Why is he living like that? What's he doing that for? So that's the trap that I say to people. Once you get clear on who you are and what you want to stand for, don't put that on other people.
No.
Because they're doing the best that they can with the skills that they've got right now. And that doesn't mean they can't change, by the way, because you've changed. Everybody changes, because we often get an idea about someone and then that preempts how we're going to be with them next time. But actually, they could be a completely different person and are actually when you meet them the next time. But we treat them as the person who we had the experience with last time, right? And then that's where judgment comes from. This is where all the problems start to come from.
I think it's, if anything, this podcast has made me, the more I've learned and the more I hear about and talk to people like yourself, and it's made me less judgmental. I think I've always been, even before doing the podcast, been clear about what I think my values are, but doing increased awareness and knowledge has made me gentler, like gentle with my judgments and thoughts. And it's just fascinating to hear you kind of, what you were describing then is, you maybe didn't have boundaries before, and then when you introduce boundaries, people are like, hang on a minute. What's this boundary here? I preferred it when there were no boundaries.
and a lot of people live that way, where people will use them, will run all over them, and they love that because you're allowing them to. When you say no and put those boundaries up, it becomes a problem for those people, and then they'll make you think, or try to make you think, that it's you. And that's where it's this living in alignment with who you are will help you to withstand the pressure from outside. So values was part of the list, and then
I just want to take you back. So when because where you were before we sort of went off on a nice tangent, but where you were was like, this sounds really low. I mean, where was the trajectory after that? What was the kind of, what happened?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was really low, and I kind of, even then, so I still didn't put myself in that category of being suicidal. I'd say to myself, well, I just wanted to die. So even I didn't feel I was worthy to be in that category, if that makes sense. Of because my understanding of mental health at that time was pretty much zero. And so you think of people who are suicidal, and there's the stigma around that. So I don't even think I wanted to be part of that, because that weren't me. You know, I wasn't like that. I don't want to be in that category. But actually, it was only after I went on did a mental health first aid course, and they go through the section about being suicidal and signs to look out for. So I think there's about 13 on the list. There was then anyway. And so I started going through this list, and I was like, yeah, that's me, ticking them off. And as we get down the list, I'm getting more and more worried. Yeah, I'm getting more and more worried, because I'm like, I'll finish soon. No, keep going. And I think it got to had a plan. I think that was like, someone's got a plan. I was like, no, I'm good. I can breathe a sigh of relief. I'm not on that list. It's only when I went home and spoke to my ex-wife about the day I'd had, and I was going through these things, that I got to had a plan. And she went like deathly quiet and still. And I was like, what's wrong? Like, what's wrong? She said, you did have a plan, but you wouldn't tell me what it was. And I was like, I felt in that moment, honestly, Martin, I felt terrible in terms of what I put that woman through. It's all right, love, don't worry about it. I know how I'll end my life, but you don't need to know about it, because, you know, I don't want to worry you, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And then she said to me that, and this kind of really hurt me as well, because she'd say, if you'd go out on an evening, I wouldn't want to ring you too early, because I didn't want to be hassling you, but I didn't want to ring you too late either, because it'd be too. And I thought, whoa, mate, that was a proper kick right in the gonads in terms of that I put someone in that kind of position unknowingly. And to be fair, lots of it now, I don't really remember too much around that time, because that's the state of mind I was in. But I then think, imagine saying that to your partner. Don't. I'm going out. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I'll know how
I've got
do
a plan.
it. I've got a plan. But don't worry. I won't. Really reassuring. So there was the acceptance then of that was massive for me. That actually I was in that category, but actually that's all right. And so this was the biggest. What happened for me with my breakthrough was I was on a NLP training course, and I went for therapeutic reasons and as well to learn to become a kind of a coach as well. And I was having a conversation with the instructor, and I'll be forever grateful to Julie, because she was the person who helped me to break through. So we were just talking one lunchtime, and I was talking about myself and my friends and family, and she just said to me, she said, Martin, I'm confused. She said, do you pay your friends and family? And I was like, what do you mean? Do I pay them? I said, what question is that? And she said, well, by the way you speak about yourself, I'm surprised any of them would want to be around you for free. And in that moment, mate, that hit me like a
I can imagine.
I knew exactly what she meant. Everything that I'd gone through, everything that I was going through was due to this way that I felt about myself, because retiring after professional sport, all my value as a person, I'd attached to that.
Yeah.
And that's what it was all placed on. And so in that moment, it was kind of, in the moments when you can run or you can stay. It's a bit like, I've seen Matrix when he's in the train station. He can run away from Mr. Smith or stay and fight.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm going to stay. I don't know why. I decided to stay because something compelled me to stay. And it was in that moment that I was able to have that realization and then start the process of healing. But that was the most painful bitter pill I've ever had to swallow in my life, was that I'd been massively responsible without knowing, but contributing, and that I felt that little of myself that I didn't think others would even. And there's been times in those darker days, mate, when people I've called to see how I've been, and I've got off the phone and cried, because even in them moments I realized that someone else cared about me more than I cared about myself. And
it's so powerful.
That's it hurts, mate. Like it to have that realization, and then because you don't think you are worthy of them to be even calling you to see how you are.
Yeah.
So it's
then,
like a
then
double,
you feel guilt, don't you? So it's
horrendous. Yeah, that you'd feel that way about yourself. But that was the starting process of recovery then. And naively, I thought, I figured out what it is now. I'm going to go like it. Lift off. And of course, there's many times I fell back, and it was after falling back quite a few times that then I was like, I've had enough of this. But this time it wasn't, I want to kill myself. It's like, I want to find out what I'm doing when I'm in the recovery periods, because it occurred to me then that very rarely do we look at things when they're going well in life, because we're just happy that we're happy. But this is because the world tells us we should be happy all the time, that any thoughts of negativity or these negative emotions, they tell us to run away from. And this is what's half of the problem, I feel, is that we should accept them all and learn how to manage them. They're not a bad thing. It's part of being human. Yeah. And so, because most times we only look at things when they go wrong, don't they? Most organizations, teams, individuals, we go, it's going wrong, what we're doing. And so I wrote down the things I were doing, and then I counted them up, and there were 11 things on the sheet, mate. And I was like, hang on a minute.
I've got a team sheet here.
And then I remember before squad numbers, because we're pretty old, mate. We played before squad numbers, right?
Yeah.
I remember
don't give me anything after 11.
Yeah, I didn't have my name on there. But I remember managers saying, if you win your battles 1 to 11, you win the game, because that's what they used to say. And I thought, there's these 11 things. Then I thought, football matches are very much like life. Like, you're never always in the ascendancy, no matter if you're the better team or not. A lot of the time, there's something will happen, just like in life, and you're up against it. And there's many times we've had to scramble to keep the ball out of the net, and the crowd are all over you. But you weather that storm. You get compact. You get your 2 banks of 4, and you see off the storm, and then you start to get a few passes together, and you start to move up the pitch. And then later on in the game, you're playing all-day football, aren't you?
A bit of confidence.
This is like, and I thought, isn't that just like life? So then I thought, wow, if we what if people knew about these things? Because they already know about them, but they're not aware of them in terms of the impact they're having on their lives. What if we could teach people about the presence of these things in every area of your life, and then they could go to work on them to manage them? How would life then look and be for people if they could work on that 1 to 11? And so that's how it was born. And then that's what I've been kind of developing and working on and trying to take to people now since, because these things are universal. They're in everybody's life all the time. We're just not aware that how we're using them.
And isn't it weird that it turned out that as you wrote down these things, there was 11? But I love what you said, is all feelings are valid. So it's not it. And I think that's something where we have progressed in our understanding that like mental health, it's not, completed it, mate, done it. It is something that requires your kind of ongoing focus. So can you take us through this 1 to 11? Who's in goal?
So this is the one thing. So the goalkeeper is the most important position in your 1 to 11. It's the one thing that I always say to people is fixed. You can't change this, and this is acceptance, because without acceptance, there's no movement forward in life. And if you think of anything you can't accept, whether that's what as kids have said to us, how as kids are behaving, we've had a power cut and we can't accept that we've had a power cut, so we're annoyed. These are all, someone pulled out on us in traffic. It's lack of acceptance is always the stopper to us ever moving forward. But I think that people think that acceptance, if I just accept it, then people will roll all over me, and they see it as resignation. And I kind of get that. But when you couple it with responsibility, it then makes it an empowering component, because you then go, right, this is where I am in life right now. I've contributed to this. But do you know what? I thought, isn't this wonderful? If I had the power to create that and take myself that low, then I'm sure I can do the opposite if I just do it for long enough. That was my kind of mindset. So, but to have acceptance of people, situations, that's the only way to move forward, to forgive, etc. Most people are stuck because they can't accept something. But it's not resignation, because that's I can't do anything about it. Responsibility means I can't change what's happened, but I can certainly be impactful on what I'm going to do.
It's like that, even that's powerful, because I think even people listening, I know I've gone to like trauma in my past, and knowing that the only time I was able to kind of progress was to sever that constant link to the event, and that only comes through acceptance.
It's everywhere. It's in everything, mate. And people, hopefully, after this podcast, will start to think more about what they are unaccepting of, and whether that's people, etc. Because once you get it and you understand it, you can learn to then practice it, which is not an easy thing, because lots of things will come along to test you whether you can accept it. But it is the starting point. And then after that, it was the communication, which we talked about. Me not communicating effectively. But also then the realization of how I was communicating with myself after football, the language that I used about myself and the world, and my thoughts, was all of a real negative, derogatory nature. Now, I was doing those things. So again, I have the option to change that language. And certainly coming from an NLP background and understanding the power of language now, then the real turnaround came in terms of how I was going to communicate with myself and other people. And I also understood that lack of communication is the breakdown for all relationships ever in life, in every relationship. So if we can get better at communication, and like we said, listen to understand, not listen to respond, we're going to be different people, which means we're going to have different outcomes of those relationships. Can you imagine two people who, says the man who's getting divorced, but I've learned this over time, right? But actually, if we learn to listen, to understand, we can then look at the other person very differently. Therefore, that'll affect the way we speak to them. And if they do the same, what would be the outcome of all these things that we have, all these problems in the world? We'd have an unbelievable change. Because like you just said before, even if we disagree, I can understand where you're coming from, you can understand where I'm coming from, and we can still say that's all right. Because we're not trying to prove a point or be better or make the other person wrong or right. We're just different.
That's the thing. We never really often go beneath the first statement. So the thing that's said that we disagree with or annoys us, we never go the layer down to understand where it's come from.
No.
What's
We're ready to put our point of view and tell the other person why we disagree with them, right?
Yeah.
So this is and the other thing I say to people: as soon as you get into that way of thinking, you've stepped into ego. Anytime you've got a problem with something, genuinely, it's because of our egos, right? We've been offended, someone's, and so I'm not saying that it's not to get rid of your ego. It's to understand that those are the warning signs that anytime something hits your stuff and gets you bothered, you've stepped into ego. Can you then step back and go, just hang on a minute, what is it that bothered me so much? And it's like I say to people, oh, Martin, you've really upset me. No, you haven't. I've got upset with you. Again, I go from disempowered by saying it's you who's made me mad to empowerment of I've made a decision based on your behavior. They're only subtle differences.
Very powerful.
They're so empowering that people use the power against themselves all the time, but because they don't know. And so this is what I'm trying to do with this 1 to 11 is say, just have a listen to this and see what you think, and then start applying some of them. They're only subtle differences, but they'll make such a huge impact on your experience of life. And it's not that you won't have any problems in your life. It's just that you'll deal with them slightly differently, right? You won't be as quick to be up and down. You'll be more of a seamless. But with communication, as I said, comes support. Identifying who's in your life. How do you feel when you're around them? Are they negatrons? Do they, or Optimus Primes? That's what we call Optimus Primes, or optimistic primes or megatrons. Do they drain your energy, or do you feel kind of energized after being around certain people? Now, often, many of these people in our families, right? So I'm not suggesting that people sack all the family off. What I'm saying is identify how you feel around certain people. What are they saying? How are they communicating? Are they really negative, putting you down when you've got ideas, wanting to live a different way than them? Start to maybe separate yourself, still see them, but understand and then where they're coming from as to why they're doing it. Because you can't get better in the same environment that you got sick. It's impossible,
very true.
right?
Yeah.
Never happening. But people stay in the same environment thinking that they're going to change and get better. And it doesn't make any sense, right? But also I say to people, what's your support network like? But how are you supporting you? Because that's a massive thing. So do you listen to the news just before bed? That's going to ply you with loads of negative stuff, right? That you're going to go to bed and sleep on. And then do you get up in the morning and do the same thing? What are you looking at on social media? Who are you speaking to? What are you taking in? Because again, we don't have to look at the news. We don't have to watch violent stuff. We don't have to speak negatively about others if we don't want to. But so I say to people, how are you supporting yourself? What time do you go to bed?
Yeah, it's a really good point.
There's so many things we can do to support ourselves. But again, it's not from a place that people don't want to. I just don't think they've considered these things.
I think you're right. And that is kind of the awareness of something you mentioned right at the start about habits. So if you're anxious or depressed, what are the habits that you have before you go to bed? Are they gonna help you get a good night's sleep, or are they gonna just turn up your anxiety or your depression? It's really good point. It's just being mindful, isn't it?
And that's what we're trying to, this self-awareness of what am I doing myself to? And I'm not saying that that's going to, make everybody suddenly all well and dancing on the ceiling. But if we start to notice what we do ourselves, we can slow the train down and then maybe put it in reverse. And so understanding what your environment's like is maybe a good thing to look at as well. Then there was values and beliefs, as we said, about being aligned. So getting really clear on what your values are and then just live to them, no matter what. But do not judge other people. Everyone's doing the best they can with the skills that they've got. We're so quick to judge, aren't we? That I'm not sitting here saying I'm perfect. Like I still do now, but it's always that awareness now. I'm judging, so stop. Then your beliefs. We talked about all that stuff about what boys believe. You're not allowed to cry. All this nonsense that you pick up from being born to 7-year-old will shape you as an individual. But the thing about beliefs is you can change them.
Yeah.
Beliefs is like the autopilot on a plane. When you go on a long haul flight, conscious mind is when we take off and land, but in between, your unconscious mind's running the show. Now, if your autopilot's programmed to go to LA, and then you want to go to Sydney, you might set off on the way to Sydney, but you're going to end up in LA, because once you switch off, the autopilot, that's why people self-sabotage, see?
Yeah.
Beliefs, because your beliefs are just a story that you've chosen to believe and take as true, and then you've just solidified it. It becomes hardwired. So what I always say to people when they tell me they can or can't do something, or they have a belief, I just have been told and trained to say, when did you decide that?
That's really good.
Yeah, because it's a question that makes you go, well, when did I decide that?
Yeah.
I've never been good at DIY, me, but when did I decide? Quite a few years ago, when I probably had not a very good experience, and then I sacked it off for the rest of my life. The other day, I put a new door handle on the toilet door. Never done it like that for years, but I had to go with it, and I've done it, and the door handle's still on. So I've changed my belief now that I can do things like that. But before, because at one point something didn't go right, I decided that I couldn't do that. And so this is what people do as well. It's like saying, I can't get better. Once you've decided, that's what I used to say, like, I can't do this, and I haven't got this. But once I made a different decision, and I repeated it over and over until I convinced myself, and it's not just like positive talking and lying to yourself. There's a repetition and a way of doing, because that's how we learn things, don't we? Through repetition. So if you repeat the things that you say in your head often enough and believe them, it's possible to do the opposite. And so this is why I say to people who believe that because I used to do it, believe that they've got something. I've got depression. I now say to myself, I've suffered with feelings of, because there's a separation. If I say I've got it, I'm so attached to it, at some point, it's going to be hard for me to give up, right? Because I remember being depressed, but also being scared to be all right on the days I felt good, because people would say, what's wrong with him? Thought he was depressed. He's laughing and joking, right? So people who are feeling better won't even start to attempt to be better, because people already know. But if you tie to that story of you've got this thing, now some people might get annoyed with me for saying that, and I'll probably hit a nerve with a few people, right? But
I think it sounds like you're people, when they're typecast as actors, you're typecasting yourself as I'm always going to be this way, and I can't act in another way.
Yeah, I say labels create limits. As soon as me and you decide that we're men, we're white, we're mixed race, we've already put a limitation on then what we can become. So 47, I'm 45. We've now put a limit on what we can become based on our age. And how many people use age as a reason for not doing stuff?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I'm not discounting what people are saying, but it's a belief that's so strong that you become attached to it, that you won't want to let go of it, and not through not wanting to, but there's just this. Because what if your belief is wrong? What does that say about you?
Isn't it funny though? Because once you've broken through some of these things, right? I can remember. So I started the podcast. Was I 44, 45? And I was at some kind of work event where we were doing face to face, and somebody said, "I've heard you started a podcast." I went, "Yeah." I went, "How old are you?" I thought it's such a strange question to go to, right? So I was like, "Oh, I'm 45." Wow, and you've just started a podcast. I mean, I know in their brain, those two things didn't compute, right? It was kind of, and I was like, yeah. And it was, for me, it felt strange, but that's because I decided I wasn't going to allow these things. So I think you're dead right. Labels, it's lazy thinking. It's how we compartmentalize. So we go, if I can give you a label, I can make some assumptions about you, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then just put you in a box that suits me. Yeah. So I can, blah, 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 whatever it is, whether it's you're a northerner, I go, okay, right, bang. He's a northerner. cobbled streets,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I can
Sorry?
start rattling some stuff off.
Yeah.
But it's because that's what suits me rather than just go, no, I want to be inquisitive, right?
Exactly. And that's the thing. And so this is what and again, it's only because my own experience, I did it, that I've then worked through it and understood. So once I attach a label to myself of suffering with or being something that I attach to myself, I'm then anchored to it. And then because we don't want to be proving ourselves wrong, we won't take the steps necessarily unknowingly to then free ourselves from those labels. And so that's why when I hear people, again, communication, I've got this, I've got that, it's a dangerous way of thinking that's going to keep you stuck, because now you're attached to this thing that's you feel is you and you own it. Therefore, it's really hard to let go of. And so that's what I've understood about beliefs, is that they're so strong, and it's like believing your personal story. There's no room for change then, because you've got this thing that you're never going to get rid of. Yeah. And once you tell yourself you've got something, what's the likelihood that you'll ever change it? It's not. So again, this is why communication and language with ourselves is an area that
I love that.
I would really love people to start looking at how they're, and it's okay to say I've got feelings of depression and I've got feelings of anxiety. Yeah, people who judge you, sod them. Do you know what I mean? That's not our support group. But to empower ourselves, we might want to start looking at the way we're speaking about who we are and what we have, if that makes sense, right? So that was massive. Beliefs are so huge. When you go back and look at where you got them from, you'll find some really interesting answers, right? And that's why I say, and that's why I work with people on as well. So that's like the keeper and some of the back four. I'll save the other one till last. But then there's goals. So I didn't have any direction when I retired. And at that time in my life, nothing that was tangible that excited me to move forward to. The life I had doing the things I was doing, just, I suppose, where do you go from your dream job? Like that. So that fallout from that, there was no real goals or vision. But then what I figured as well, I said, is with the goals comes, there's always a plan. It's like going to make a cup of tea. That's the goal. But there's a process I've got to go through to make sure I get a cup of tea. And it's the same in life. Whether it's to feel good every day, find out what the process is that you go through to make that a reality. Even if it's getting out of bed, how are you going to do that? So I always ask people, have these little goals. Don't have the massive climb Mount Everest. Have the little base camp ones till you weather the storm, got confident. Once you're flying, you can put, I'm going to go rule the world on, can't you, when you're full of confidence? But until then, just make it. This next hour is going to be the best that I can make it, right? And that's your goal. And then, right, what does that look like? So I say to people, put your plan in place, and then also having structure in your life. Again, like we said, bedtime, morning routine, what you're doing, what you're watching, just becoming aware. And then once you've got your plan and your way of being and doing, and you've looked at your language and you question your beliefs always, and are you in alignment with your values, and who have you got around you, and are you taking responsibility and stuff, circle of control and things, then it's about consistency and discipline that go hand in hand to execute the plan. But all consistency and discipline are our habits. Because we're all consistent and we're all disciplined, right? Like I said to you, over the last week, I got really disciplined at eating KFC, McDonald's, fish and chips, curry, and a Chinese, right? I'm really consistent, Martin.
I was smashing it.
And I was smashing it. I was disciplined because I was going to do that on that particular day. So, but what I'm saying to people is identify what your habits are. Go away and look at what are you consistent and disciplined at, because you are, everybody is, and then see if those habits are serving you or causing you a problem. And then maybe it's up to you then, up to the individual. Do you want to change those habits? Because even something like with food, right, for example, the biggest problem we all have with food is that it's like a little bit like the Freud thing. We've got, so I say it's like the kid, we're all the greedy kid when we get stuck in and we don't know when to stop, right? When we get to certain foods.
Yeah, but I'm an adult now. I can do what I want.
Well, here's the thing, mate. So we're either, when it comes to food and a lot of stuff, we're either the kid that doesn't know when to stop. If we're not the kid, we're the judgmental parent who tells us off for doing it and then makes us feel shamed. So then the kid in us goes, well, I feel terrible. I need to go do that thing again, right? But when we understand that we are the adult and we're allowed to do what we want and we can eat as much of that as we want, but we're responsible for what happens after, it's a different mindset. I've written on a cupboard, adult, just written the word adult on the cupboard where the sweets are. Because it says to me, when I go to the cupboard, I go, adult, right, just get a couple and walk off. Whereas if it's not there, I'm in greedy child mode who used to burn thousands of calories every day so he could eat what he wanted, and I'll get stuck in like I won't stop. Then
I need to take a post-it note to the co-op, and write that underneath the Skittles.
But
what are you doing?
Just a reminder. So habits are your discipline and consistency, but they're underpinned by commitment, right? So I thought I had to be committed fully to this changing of my thinking to change the way that I experience life. And so that's not without its issues. I'm not sat here to say to everyone, I never have any dark days or it's Disneyland every day, because it's not. I face challenges, but I've got a way of doing things now and an understanding that the commitment is that I'm not going to go back to that place, and I've got a way of doing things. And so that's what keeps me driving forward to carry out my plan, right? And my way of thinking and catching myself when I go back to those old patterns, because we all do. That's why the habits, right? So then the commitment's there, but the commitment comes from a courage to not be scared to fail. In today's society, I see it with my kids, they're all scared to try stuff because everyone's taking a picture and can criticize you, and they'd rather not try than have a go. Whereas when we had a go, only the kids who play in the football match saw it, right? No one else knew. So, but the work I've also done with a guy called Dr. I think it's Dr. David R. Hawkins. He has something called the map of consciousness, which people might want to check out. And it goes through all these emotional states, and kind of every emotional state carries a kind of an energy field that has an impact on us physically as well. So just like muscle testing stuff, right? And he says the level 200 of courage is the fastest way to go from the weak attractor patterns, which are like guilt, shame, apathy, fear, anger, pride, to the higher levels that then strengthen you. Because if you think about anything you've ever had to do, it took courage to either have the conversation with someone, stand up for yourself, say you're not doing anything anymore. So courage for people is the fastest way to change anything, to admit that you've got a problem, fastest, because then it takes you quickly from these weaker levels that then harm you into ones that are going to strengthen you. So that courage of commitment is something that's really important. So for anyone who's struggling, what is it that's scaring you about what you need to do? If you go do that thing, and I'm saying to people, asking for help, maybe having that conversation, backing yourself to, even if you're old and you think you're old and you can't do it, maybe go have a go at it. That might be the quickest way to feel differently about the situation. And then the other one was time. Time's our most precious commodity that I finally realised. And it's not money, it's not possessions, despite what the world tells us. Because I just started with the end in mind. When I get to the end, I know what I want more of. And it'll be more time to spend with the people that I love. And so that's how I've now lived my life, going, that's what's important to me. Lots of people painting lots of different pictures out there in social media land of all these things that they tell you is going to make you happy. But once you've got them, what do you do then? You've got to get the next thing and the next thing, and you're never ever going to be happy, because happiness is an inside job. So I'd say to anyone, stop looking outside yourself or stuff or people, because it's not people's job to make you happy, because they can't do it anyway. It's impossible. If all my happiness was reliant on you, Mark, at some point you're going to let me down. Because I'll have put on expectations. God, Martin, he must do this to keep me happy. And so that's what people do all the time, right? So people are there to enhance your experience. They're not there to make you happy. You've got to take that on for yourself. And so I say to people, look at how you're using your time. Are you investing it in yourself? So maybe read a few books, look at some different things. Are you spending it actively, like I'm spending it now, loving speaking to you because you're someone who, but it's true, right? This is not wasted time. This is unbelievably great time for me, right? Or how much time do you waste? How much time do people waste scrolling through social media, getting involved in things that don't concern them, then when they get to the end of their life, they're going to be upset because they didn't. Oh, I never got to do that. Well, that's because you're on Facebook 12 hours a day. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you weren't doing that and you kept your nose out of everyone else's business and took care of your own life, maybe you could have done some different things. So I think this time is this commodity that we're all scared of, that's running out, we can't get back. So make that a priority, make your time a priority. Because if you're missing out on loads of stuff, I understand why people do it, but you can't get that time back. And then you've got to live the rest of your life knowing you can't get that time back. And so what's important to you? That's what I just say to people now. What is important to you? And time is the greatest gift.
Are you like you're the manager of this 1 to 11, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Do you like who's performing well, who might need a bit of physio? So I can see my centre back is communication, and I need to send the physio on to sort that out, because like so many of us who love football, I straight away in my mind, that's how I'm seeing this 1 to 11.
You're the manager, you can see who's playing well and who's not. And then when depending on however the game's going, so life, once we experience a difficult moment in life, that could be that point in the game where I need to change the formation. I need to put him there because he's better. Do you know what I mean? So it gives you this option also to go, right, things are going wrong. What have I stopped doing? What am I not doing? But, right, I'm not communicating very well. That's what I need to work on. That's who I need to go work. So it gives you this ongoing assessment tool that you can use to fix or at least manage difficult situations in your life. And also when things are going well, because when your team's playing well, how do you keep them playing well?
How can people find out more about this? Because I guess, now, the concept, I absolutely love it. And I'm sure there's people listening. How do people get in touch with you, find out more about this 1 to 11?
Yeah, so I've got a website is www.just1to11it.co.uk. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn and Martin Pemberton. I'm on Facebook as well, Martin Pemberton, and I have a men's group on there called the Boot Room. So if people want to search up for that, and there's just a lot of positive material, little things that we put in there on a daily basis on Facebook. On Instagram at Pem1to11, so I put loads of videos and little motivational things and things to think about on there. And I think that's it, mate, for the social media platforms that I can think of. And then my email, Pembo, Pembo, the number 1, the word to, the number 11 at gmail.com. And then people can contact me from there, mate, because it's something that I massively believe in. I never set out to create it. It's come through a natural process, and so I know that it's the real deal. And I think with the format of football, many will get it. But the other thing I say, it doesn't have to be football. You can put your 1 to 11 into anything. It could, if you was someone who likes baking cakes, how do you make the perfect cake? There's your ingredients and utensils. What do you need? You know, so if it's construction, you need certain things to build buildings and houses. Your 1 to 11 can be your foundation. So it's very individual. People can tailor it to their own needs. But the one thing I just say is that because we're aware of these 11 things, we all know they exist, because there's no rocket science like, oh, I've never heard of that. Everyone's heard of time and discipline and consistency. It's just that I don't think we fully understand or are aware of how we use them.
And their relation
to problem to each other. How they coincide, kind of right? And I think that's where, for me, when I see it now, it's really simplistic, right? Because I can listen to people and I can hear them speak, and I pick something off that list straight away, and I go, that's what we could work on. So, and this is what I want other people to be able to learn it, to be able to say, all right. And so my dream is that one day, mate, someone will be having a conversation like me and you, and I might be telling you about some of my problems, and you say, hey, why don't you just 1 to 11 it? And I'll go, oh yeah. And I'll go and look at it and go, oh yeah, I was blaming, wasn't I? I didn't understand that was for me to take responsibility for. And then people have this little toolkit that they can just help them to navigate life. Because the way the world is now, mate, we're believing a load of lies in terms of what makes you happy and what you should be doing and who you have to be. And God, people are not even accepting of themselves. So how are we going to accept other people, whether that's our bodies, finances, we're like this acceptance thing, mate. We could do a 2-hour talk on acceptance on its own because it's prevalent, and everybody is non-accepting of something or someone. And even when we talk, I think we had a brief chat about even with discrimination, right? Racism, sexism, whatever you want to say, it's through lack of acceptance.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the 1 to 11 is a kind of thing I would just love to see more discussion around stuff like that. Take that concept into schools and take kids to actually have conversations around some of those things you've mentioned, and just what it means to be a human, and developing their own internal toolkit, right? So that they have their own compass, as well as all of the different messages they're getting, some good, some bad, but unfiltered, just and they're accessing it 24/7. It'd just be great I could just imagine your concept in a group of lads who understand football, but I've never thought about how they talk to themselves,
it's honestly, and it took that experience for it to come out. But that's the reason I believe I went through it, was for this to come out. The football career, the mental health issues, was all for this 1 to 11 to be born as such and created so that it can go and help lots of people. And I just believe that it can help anybody in any situation. So schools, businesses, sports, relationships, whatever, I think there's something there that each person can take away and kind of use to their advantage.
Well, I'm grateful for you, just as who you are as a person, but coming on, and I said it before, so I'm not just saying this because we're recording, but we were talking before a week ago, weren't we? We are mates now, so I'm
100%.
I'm glad you're in my world, but also I just want to thank you for sharing your journey and doing what you do, because the more people that speak about this kind of thing, especially men, and like you were a footballer an idol to lads like me growing up.
A couple of people
a couple of people at Donny Rovers.
Yeah. And then
some man and his dog.
Yeah, some man and his
dog. Bloody Pemberton again.
I know. And do you know what, mate? You've just mentioned the last one of the 1 to 11 that we didn't mention, gratitude.
Yeah, okay, nice.
And because that's the glue that kind of enables us to hold a lot of these things together, right? And so gratitude is something that changes your physiology, that will then change the way you feel and think, but also it's not a natural behavior for us because we're born to be skeptical, aren't we, and pessimistic to keep us alive, whereas gratitude, being grateful for something, changes the way you feel about things and yourself. And then even for the simplest things, like you said, of waking up every day or being able to be able-bodied. I've got a good friend of mine who's in a wheelchair and disabled, right? And so every day he pops into my mind because I can just turn over in bed. He can't on his own. I can just get up and walk to the toilet. And we take those things for granted, but I've got a living person in front of me who I respect and revere so much because of what he does and has to face. And I take all those things sometimes for granted. So he's a constant reminder for me to be grateful for all the things that I get to do. And when you have gratitude in your heart and you connect with the emotion of it, then it's a really powerful, really powerful thing.
This will be the first of many, I'm sure of it, won't it?
I hope so, mate. We've got all sorts to talk about, haven't we?
Yeah, definitely. Martin Pemberton, and I'll share all of those links and things like that in the post that we do. But thank you very much. It's been brilliant.
Mate, honestly, one of the best conversations ever, mate. I love it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everybody.